Why does one bun stay soft and stretchy while another turns dry and tight, even with the same flour? The answer can start before the dough is even shaped. One technique used in Chinese-style baking begins with something surprisingly simple. Flour and water cooked into a paste. That paste changes how the dough holds moisture, giving the finished bun a softer, more tender texture. And it takes only a few minutes to make. Here's exactly how it works. Number 27. The tangzhong paste. Tangzhong is a cooked flour and water paste stirred into bread dough before kneading, and it's the reason Asian milk bread stays soft for days while a regular loaf turns stale overnight. Cooking the flour first pre-gelatinizes its starch, so the dough can hold far more water than it normally could without turning gummy. You make it in under 2 minutes, just flour and water or milk, whisked over low heat until it thickens into a thick paste, almost like a pudding. Let it cool, then mix it straight into your regular dough as if it were just another wet ingredient. Try it once on a basic bun recipe and the difference is immediate. You'll feel it in the first squeeze. And by day 3, when a normal bun has already gone hard, this one will still give under your thumb like it just came out of the oven. Number 26. Milk temperature. Done right, yeast doesn't die the instant milk gets warm. It actually stays safe up to a fairly wide range, and only starts breaking down once you're pushing past roughly 60 degrees Celsius. The real mistake home bakers make is scalding milk straight off the stove and dumping it in without checking, killing half the yeast before the dough ever gets a chance to rise. Chinese bakers just test with a finger, comfortably warm, not hot. Close to body temperature. If you can hold your finger in it without wanting to pull away, it's ready. No thermometer required. And it's the single fastest way to fix a dough that never seems to rise no matter how long you wait. Number 25. Swap to cake flour. Cake flour has noticeably less protein than all-purpose flour, which means less gluten forms when you mix it. Less gluten equals a softer, almost cloud-like crumb, which is why so many bakery-style buns feel nothing like the dense stuff you get from a standard bread recipe. Pick up a piece of bakery milk bread and a piece of regular sandwich bread side by side, and press them both with a finger. The bakery one springs back soft and slow, the other barely moves. That's the protein difference, sitting right there in your hand. Number 24. The second rise. Letting dough proof twice, with a gentle deflate in between, builds a finer, more even network of air pockets than a single long rise ever could. It costs you maybe 40 extra minutes. What you get back is that pillowy bounce you associate with an actual bakery, not a home kitchen. The first rise does the heavy lifting on flavor, but it's the second rise, after you've punched it down and reshaped it, that actually refines the crumb structure. Smaller, more consistent bubbles instead of a few big uneven ones that collapse the second you slice into it. Number 23. Stop measuring with cups. A packed cup of flour can weigh 20% more than a loosely spooned one. And that swing alone is enough to sink a cake or turn a bun into a brick. Chinese bakeries weigh everything: flour, sugar, liquid, even the yeast down to the gram. Grab a cheap kitchen scale. It's the fastest fix on this entire list, and it ends more baking failures than any other single change. If you've ever followed a recipe exactly and still gotten inconsistent results 2 times in a row, this is almost always the hidden reason, not your technique. Number 22. Fold egg whites in thirds. Dump whipped egg whites into batter all at once, and you knock half the air right back out, no matter how gently you think you're folding. Adding them in 3 gentle additions instead keeps the structure intact. The first third loosens the batter enough to accept the rest without a fight. And the last 2 fold in cleanly without deflating what you've already built. It's the actual mechanical reason a Chinese sponge cake stays light instead of collapsing the second it cools on the counter. Number 21. The one bakery schools skip here. It is the water bath. Instead of baking a cake dry in open oven heat, the pan sits inside a second, larger pan filled with hot water. So the cake never touches direct dry heat at all. Most Western baking programs actively avoid this for cakes because it's associated with custards, not sponge. It isn't traditional for cake, so it doesn't get taught, and most home bakers have simply never seen it applied outside of a cheesecake. But the gentle, even steam heat is exactly why a Chinese steamed cake never cracks on top and stays moist for days instead of drying out by the next morning. It's not a myth or a gimmick. The texture difference is obvious the moment you cut into it, almost custardy at the edges and impossibly light in the center. Number 20. Cold tools. Cold butter for anything that needs to be flaky and crisp, like egg tarts or layered pastries. Keep your butter cold from the very beginning. And here's the part many people overlook. Chill your tools too. Put your mixing bowl and rolling pin in the freezer for around 10 to 15 minutes if your kitchen is warm. The goal is to keep the butter from softening while you're working with the dough. When the cold butter hits the hot oven, it melts and releases steam. That steam helps separate the layers of dough, creating those thin, crisp, flaky layers instead of a heavy, greasy texture. So if your pastry keeps coming out flat or oily, don't just change the recipe. Check the temperature of your ingredients and tools first. Number 19. Why lard beats butter here? Here's a surprising one. Lard isn't automatically better simply because it has a lower melting point. That's a common baking myth. The bigger difference comes from how the fat behaves inside the dough. Lard can create larger pockets of fat between the dough layers. As those pockets heat up during baking, they help create more separation, giving traditional style pastries that crisp, delicate, melt-away texture. But you don't have to choose between lard and butter. Many bakers use both. Lard helps with the flaky texture, while butter brings that rich, familiar flavor. So if you want the best of both worlds, try blending the two instead of relying on butter alone. Number 18. Yolk only egg wash. Skip the whole egg and use just the yolk. The yolk gives your buns and pastries a much deeper, richer golden color as they bake. Egg white can sometimes leave a lighter, slightly rubbery-looking film on the surface, especially when you brush on too much. For an easier, smoother coating, whisk the yolk with a small splash of milk. This loosens it just enough to spread evenly across the dough. Brush on a thin layer before baking, making sure you reach the edges without letting the egg wash collect in the folds. Number 17. Let dough rest at room temp. If your dough has been sitting in the fridge, don't start shaping it immediately. Cold dough becomes firm and resistant, which makes delicate folds much harder to create. When you force it, the dough can stretch unevenly or even tear. Instead, let it rest at room temperature for about 20 to 30 minutes. As it warms slightly, the dough becomes softer and more flexible. You'll notice the difference immediately when you start rolling or shaping it. It stretches more easily and is much less likely to fight back. Number 16. The wet hand shaping trick. When working with sticky dough, your first instinct might be to add more flour. Don't. Too much extra flour can change the dough's texture and make the finished pastry tougher than you intended. For sticky doughs such as mooncake dough, lightly wet your hands with water instead. A damp palm gives you enough control to shape the dough without adding extra flour. If your hands start sticking again, simply wet them lightly once more. Keep the moisture minimal. You want slightly damp hands, not dripping wet hands. Number 15. Laminate. Then localize. Want a pastry with those beautiful thin flaky layers? Try laminating the dough. The basic idea is simple. Work thin layers of butter into the dough, then fold and roll it several times. When baked, those layers separate and create a crisp, delicate texture. Chinese-style pastries can use the same principle but take it in a completely different direction. Instead of leaving the pastry plain, you can combine those flaky layers with fillings such as red bean or taro. The technique creates the texture while the filling gives it its own traditional character. Number 14. Low and slow for custard. Custard doesn't like aggressive heat. If the oven is too hot, the eggs can cook too quickly, causing the filling to curdle, crack, or become grainy instead of staying smooth. The better approach is to lower the oven temperature slightly and allow the custard more time to set. Watch for the center to become smooth and gently jiggly, rather than completely firm. The custard will continue setting as it cools. This slower bake gives you that silky texture and helps prevent the surface from becoming dry, cracked, or scrambled looking. Number 13. Steam the cake. Don't bake it. Certain Chinese sponge cakes are steamed from start to finish, never touching dry oven heat at all. Moist heat cooks the batter more gently and evenly, which is why the texture ends up closer to a cloud than anything a conventional oven can produce. No browning, no crust, just pure soft crumb all the way through. Set up a steamer with simmering water, not a rolling boil, because water that's too aggressive can knock air bubbles around inside the batter and leave the surface pitted. Cover the top of the cake pan loosely with foil so condensation from the lid doesn't drip straight onto the surface and leave wet craters. 25 to 30 minutes later, you'll have something that doesn't even look like it came from the same category as an oven-baked cake paler. springier, almost jiggly at the edges. Number 12, build your own cake flour. No cake flour in the house? Sub 2 tablespoons of cornstarch for 2 tablespoons of flour in every cup of all-purpose flour to drop the protein content artificially. It's not identical to the real thing, but it gets you most of the way there in a pinch, and it's the fix most Chinese home bakers grew up using before cake flour was easy to find in local stores. Sift the two together at least twice so the cornstarch distributes evenly instead of clumping in one part of the batter. An uneven mix means an uneven crumb, with soft patches next to denser ones in the same slice. Number 11, score before you bake. A shallow score across the top of a bun controls exactly where it expands, so it puffs up evenly instead of splitting open on one random side and baking lopsided. Even a single straight cut with a sharp blade is enough to guide the rise. Go about half a centimeter deep. No more cut too deep and you risk deflating the dough right before it goes into the oven, undoing the entire proofing process you just spent an hour on. A confident, quick motion works better than a slow, hesitant one, which tends to drag and tear the surface instead of slicing it cleanly. Number 10, room temp eggs. Every time cold eggs straight from the fridge can shock butter or batter into seizing, breaking the smooth emulsion you worked for and leaving little flecks of curdled fat through your batter. Pull them out early and let them come up to room temperature. First 30 minutes on the counter is usually enough. If you forget and you're short on time, submerge them in their shells in a bowl of warm water for about 5 minutes. It's not perfect, but it's far better than cracking them in cold and watching your batter split in front of you. Number 9, humid proofing. A bowl of hot water sitting in the oven next to your covered dough keeps the air humid enough that the dough surface never dries into a tough skin while it rises, which is what causes that unpleasant crust-like layer on top of an otherwise soft loaf. Refresh the water halfway through a long proof if your kitchen is especially dry, since it does cool down and lose effectiveness. Some bakers go a step further and lightly mist the dough itself with water before covering it, adding a second layer of insurance against that same dry skin problem. Number 8, toast before you fold in. Raw sesame seeds and nuts taste flat and slightly bitter. Toast them first in a dry pan for 2 or 3 minutes until fragrant, and the flavor that gets folded into the dough is genuinely a different ingredient, same seed. Deeper, nuttier flavor that actually survives the baking process instead of getting lost. Keep the pan moving constantly, because sesame seeds especially go from perfectly golden to burnt in a matter of seconds once they start turning color, and there's no saving them once they cross that line. Number 7, glaze. The second it comes out, brush a sugar water glaze onto bread the moment it leaves the oven, while it's still hot enough to absorb it. It locks in surface moisture and gives that glossy bakery shine that butter alone never quite achieves, and it only takes a 1-to-1 ratio of sugar and hot water, stirred until dissolved. Work fast here, because the window where the crust is hot enough to actually absorb the glaze rather than just sit on top of it closes within the first minute or 2 out of the oven. A soft pastry brush, not a stiff one, keeps you from tearing the delicate just baked crust while you apply it. Number 6, a touch of condensed milk. A small amount of condensed milk worked into dough adds richness and a soft sweetness. Without tipping the final product into dessert territory, this is the quiet backbone of a lot of Hong Kong-style bakery buns. And it's often the ingredient people can't quite name when they say a bun tastes like the bakery, but can't explain why. Because it already contains sugar. Cut back slightly on any sugar the base recipe calls for, or the final dough ends up sweeter than intended and starts caramelizing too fast on the crust while the inside is still underbaked. Number 5, the window pane test. Take a small piece of dough and gently stretch it between your fingers. Keep stretching until it becomes very thin. If you can see light through the dough without it tearing, that's a good sign that the gluten has developed enough to support the dough during baking. Your finished bun should have a more stable, cohesive crumb instead of breaking apart easily. If the dough tears almost immediately, don't guess at the timing. Knead it for another 2 or 3 minutes, then test it again. Keep checking until you can stretch it thin without the dough breaking. The useful part of this test is that it tells you what the dough is actually doing. Kneading time can change depending on the flour, hydration, room temperature, humidity, and even how vigorously you're kneading. The window pane test ignores all of those variables. You're not asking, have I kneaded this for long enough? You're asking, is the gluten developed enough yet? Number 4, the post-steam rice. This connects back to hack 1. Actually, same principle of protecting moisture, just applied at the opposite end of the process. Leave steamed buns inside the covered steamer for a few minutes after the heat's off. Pulling the lid immediately shocks them with a sudden temperature drop. And that's what causes the wrinkled sunken top you sometimes see on homemade steamed buns. Even cracking the lid slightly first rather than removing it all the way gives the buns a gentler transition and noticeably fewer collapsed tops across a whole batch. Number 3, portion by weight, not by eye. One of the easiest ways to get inconsistent results is to make your dough portions different sizes. Even a small difference can change how quickly each bun bakes. That's why you might pull one bun from the oven perfectly golden while the one beside it is still doughy in the center. Use the same kitchen scale from Hack 5 and weigh every piece before shaping. For a standard batch, around 40 to 50 grams per bun is a good starting point, but the exact weight depends on your recipe and the size you're making. The important part is consistency. When every piece is the same weight, they rise more evenly, brown at roughly the same rate, and finish baking at almost the same time. It takes an extra minute before baking, but it can make the entire batch look like it came from a professional bakery. Number 2, the bread slice storage trick. The same moisture principle works even after your baking is finished. If you want homemade buns, cake, or other soft pastries to stay tender for longer, try this simple storage trick. Place the finished bake in an airtight container and add 1 slice of plain bread beside it. The bread helps balance the moisture inside the container, so your cake or buns don't dry out as quickly. And here's the clever part. The bread goes stale first. It essentially takes the hit, helping your baked goods stay softer instead of becoming dry and hard overnight. If the bread slice becomes completely dry, replace it with a fresh one every day or 2. Just make sure the container is clean and properly sealed, so you're controlling moisture rather than trapping too much of it. It's a simple old-fashioned trick, but sometimes the easiest storage hacks make the biggest difference. Number 1. The instinct behind all 30. Every single technique in this video traces back to the same 3 things: reading moisture, reading temperature, and reading texture at every stage instead of just following a timer. That's genuinely the difference between someone who follows a recipe and someone who understands what the recipe is actually doing. One panics when something looks slightly off. The other adjusts on instinct because they know what caused it. That instinct doesn't come from one video. It comes from doing this over and over until the dough itself starts telling you what it needs before a timer ever does. You now have all 31 pieces. What you do with them is up to you. Outro CTA of Hack 7. Change the way you think about baking a simple cake. Wait until you see what a water bath can do for cheesecake. That video is coming next week, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Subscribe now so you're here when it drops, and tell me in the comments, which hack are you trying first? I read the comments, and I might feature your answer in the next video.